Thanks. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. This is great. This is a great crowd. And you have a great campus here. If you're a student here, if you're a faculty here, good job. I got a great tour of it and experienced a lot today. I'm excited. But let's get into it, shall we? Thank you, everybody, for being here. I want to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to American University in Cairo, to the Department of Psychology, Mona specifically, the faculty and the students, for inviting me to share this space and conversation with you this afternoon. It's an honor to be here in Egypt, my first time, the cradle of so many of our shared symbolic and spiritual heritage. So many of the ideas that have shaped both Western philosophy and inner spiritual practice trace their roots to this land and to its profound relationship with the Nile, with the cycles of death and renewal, and with the mysteries of transformation. So my own path has been one of seeking and synthesis. I come to you as a Jungian psychotherapist, someone trained in depth psychology and in the language of dreams, symbols, and archetypes. And also as a Muslim, a recent revert deeply drawn to the inner dimensions of Islam, what we might call the psychology of the heart. Over the years, I've found myself standing in the space between these worlds, the psychological and the spiritual, watching how they speak to one another in the same symbolic tongue. Both seek transformation. Both trust the unseen. Both call us towards wholeness. Today, I'd like to explore that meeting point where Jungian depth psychology and the alchemical imagination intersect with the spiritual tradition that was born here along the Nile. Today, I invite us not only to think about alchemy, but to feel it as a living metaphor for the psyche's own process of change. So let's begin at the very beginning with the black earth itself. When we speak of alchemy, most people imagine dark secret laboratories, old men hunched over furnaces, trying to turn lead into gold. But the word alchemy, or in Arabic, al-kīmiyāঃ, comes from the term Kemet, the ancient name for Egypt. Kemet means the black land. It referred to the dark, rich soil left by the flooding of the Nile. Soil that could take lifeless sand and bring forth abundance. That, I think, is the truest metaphor for the psyche, the black, fertile ground of the soul. It is not sterile. It is not clean. It is living, messy, and generative. Transformation always begins there, in the black earth. Carl Jung associated this black earth with the first stage of alchemy in the magnum opus, or the great work. This first stage is known as the negredo. It is the darkening or the putrefaction, the first stage of transformation. The alchemist said putrefaction is the beginning of renewal. When we work with a patient in therapy, we too begin there, in the darkness, in the depths, the uncertainty. We work in those moments of, I don't know how we got on this topic. The unconscious, like the Nile, moves in mysterious cycles, flooding, retreating, renewing. So before we can understand Jung's engagement with alchemy, we have to understand what alchemy really was and what it wasn't. Before Jung ever encountered alchemy, the tradition had already traveled through centuries of hands, from Egypt to the Arab world, and finally into Europe. It was never merely about metals or transmuting lead into gold. It was always about the human being as the true laboratory. To the alchemist, the work was sacred. The furnace was an altar. The alembic and retort were symbols of the soul. They believed that by refining matter, that they were also refining themselves, purifying the dense, leaden elements of the psyche to reveal the hidden gold within. Alchemy wasn't the origin of chemistry, as we sometimes hear. It was the science of the soul, a devotional experiment in union with the divine. The great work, the magnum opus, was nothing less than a lifelong process of knowing myself. And to know oneself meant to include the unknown parts, dreams, projections, irrational impulses, and those divine mysteries that surface when we slow down and listen. Alchemy spoke through image, symbol, and process, not through logic. I'll say that again. Alchemy spoke through image, symbol, and process, not through logic. We're talking about discovering the unconscious here, right? By definition, it's unconscious. We can't know it directly. Logic is not going to be a tool that helps us. When the alchemist described the blackening, this first stage, the first stage of the great work, the second stage, the whitening, the third stage, the yellowing, and the fourth stage, the reddening, he wasn't recording chemical reactions. He was describing movements of consciousness. Each transformation within the vessel was mirrored by a transformation in the heart. The alchemists called the substance that they began with the prima materia, the raw, chaotic matter that holds all potential. In Egypt, that prima materia was the black soil, the Kemet, the same fertile ground that gives life after the Nile's flood. The same dark richness Jung saw as the beginning of psychological transformation. Now, interestingly, a few days ago, I was traveling from Cairo up to Alexandria, and my driver pointed out the window and gestured at the fields and said something about the black earth, how it nourishes everything, how it's what makes Egypt alive. And I just smiled, because that's the essence of alchemy. And here this Uber driver naturally spoke to it. The psyche speaks to the land itself, reminding us that the work of the soul begins, always, in the dark, fertile soil of life. By the time Jung encountered the alchemists, he'd already spent years mining the depths of the unconscious. Yet even he sensed something was missing, some bridge between the inner images of his patient's dreams and the outer world of spirit and matter. Then, in midlife, that bridge appeared. He'd had a dream of a vast library filled with ancient books he could not read, that were filled with symbols he couldn't understand. Not long after, in a great synchronicity Jung would come to love, someone sent him a strange volume, The Artist's Aurifere, a 16th century collection of alchemical texts. As he opened it, he recognized these images from his dream. Serpents, suns, vessels, kings and queens, the very same symbols that had been emerging from his patient's dreams and his own active imagination. In that moment, Jung realized that alchemy had been the unconscious of Western civilization, a secret record of the soul's transformation, written in the language of symbol. For him, alchemy became the missing bridge between psyche and matter, between personal experience and the collective imagination. Alchemists were not proto-chemists. They were early depth psychologists. Their laboratories were temples and their experiments acts of devotion. Later, Jung would say that alchemy provided him with the historical counterpart to his own psychology. The alchemist projected the process of individuation into matter, he wrote, and I have translated it back into psyche. After Jung, others carried the work forward. Marie-Louise von Franz deepened the symbolic and feminine dimension of alchemy, showing how the anima and animus mediate transformation. I'll give you a tip: if you walk out here with anything, don't sleep on Marie-Louise von Franz, right? If you, I get people all the time ask me, I'm very interested in Carl Jung. Which of his works should I read? And I say, none of them, right? He was a brilliant man and a very technical and clinical writer. He's very hard to read. I read him often, and I have to stop after a while. He is brilliant, but he's not easy to read. Read von Franz, right? Read Edinger. Read Murray Stein. These people can take Jung's very complex concepts and make them accessible, right? I'll provide Mona with a list, a reading list that's good entry reading material for Jung that isn't Carl Jung himself. Edward Edinger gave the process of alchemical psychology structure, mapping the stages of the magnum opus onto the stages of individuation. Murray Stein later described individuation itself as modern alchemy, an inner journey towards wholeness. Jung often said he did not find alchemy. Alchemy found him. It rose from the depths of his dreams and from the collective unconscious to show the psyche has been conducting the great work long before we gave it a name. And so when we study alchemy today, we're not merely studying history. We are listening to the psyche remember itself, revealing the patterns of transformation that run through every life. This is interesting. Anybody notice anything about this? The alchemists describe their work as a sacred sequence of transformations, the process between both material and spiritual. Jung saw in ancient formula a map of the soul's unfolding, what he called the process of individuation. Though there were many variations in alchemy, some had up to 12, 14 stages. Some had 3. But most contained these 4. And in deciphering most alchemy, the work can be done with these stages. These 4 are the Negredo, the Albedo, the Citrinatus, and the Rubedo. Each represents a passage, a moment of death, purification, illumination, and finally integration. So let's walk through them one at a time. If you notice this symbol off to the side, anybody seen this symbol before? This is a Lakota medicine wheel, right? Surprising that the similarities in this, right? One being this map, starting here in Laredo and working around, and this Lakota medicine wheel, right? Correlating with the fur directions, right? Both symbolizing wholeness on 2 different continents separated by thousands of years. So the first stage is the Negredo, the blackening. Every alchemical process begins with dissolution, with the Negredo, the darkening. In the alchemical vessel, materials decay and decompose. In the psyche, something similar occurs. Old structures collapse, identities break apart, roles fragment, certainty dissolves. This is the moment when a patient says, "Everything I thought I knew is falling apart." This is the stage where somebody enters your office for the first time. All the coping mechanisms they've developed through life no longer work. All of the relationships they've built for support don't seem to help this crisis in their life. They're coming to you because their life feels like it's falling apart. If you see this, they're suffering, right? That's why I use the term patient and not client. Client to me conveys a transaction, right? Patient, the root word in Latin is passio. Anybody familiar with it? It means to suffer. Our patients are suffering. Give them the dignity of acknowledging that. Everyone suffers. They don't have to do it alone. Clinically, the nigredo may look like depression, or grief, or disorientation. Yet beneath the despair, something new is being prepared. Again, in the alchemist said, putrefaction is the beginning of renewal. In other words, it's in the breaking down that the soul's new life begins. The nigredo is the black earth of Kemet, the fertile soil from which transformation can emerge. This darkness is not an error. This darkness is not pathology. This darkness is not an illness. It is the beginning of transformation. It is the raw material of rebirth. The next stage is the albedo, or the whitening. Out of the darkness of nigredo, a new clarity arises. The alchemists called this albedo, the whitening, symbolized by the white dove or the moon. After the dissolution, there comes a moment of reflection, of purification and insight. The opposites begin to differentiate, and the light of awareness dawns. Psychologically, this might appear as forgiveness, a sense of relief, or the first breath after what Thomas More called the long dark night of the soul. It's going to feel like hope. In therapy, this is when a patient says, I can finally see what's happening. The water's cleared, the heart is cleansed. It's not yet completion, only illumination, insight. But already, the soul begins to remember its own light. The next stage is citronatus, the yellowing, the dawning of consciousness. This is the moment of maturation, of balance between the opposites discovered in the last stage. The sun begins to rise within. In Jungian terms, it represents the awakening of the inner light, the emergence of wisdom that integrates both shadow and spirit. The alchemist saw this as the golden hour, when the material begins to shimmer with soul. It is not the blinding noon of certainty, but the soft light of awareness, steady, warm, humane. Psychologically, this is when meaning for the patient crystallizes, when the fragments of a person's story begin to align around something coherent and whole. And this meaning is always, always discovered by the patient. It's never discovered by us, right? The rubedo, the final stage, the reddening, the completion of the great work. It is the fourth stage, it is not the final stage. Here the opposites unite, spirit and matter, masculine and feminine, consciousness and the unconscious. This is the alchemical marriage, the kīmiyā಼, as the alchemists called it. This is where it takes place. This is the most important stage, right? We had this suffering, this I don't know what's going on, I don't know what's wrong. Everything I try no longer works. We had the next stage, a little bit of hope, right? A little bit of clarity, just enough to get curious about the self and a belief that it can change. The next one is when we start to piece it, put some structure together, right? Separating these opposites within us, right? This desire for good, this shadow within each of us, right? Or in Islam, like our nafs. This integration is this fourth stage is where we bring these opposites together. Does anybody know what we call that when we can hold the tension of two opposites? It's paradox, right? Which we know is an advanced psychological concept, right? Children lack the capacity to hold paradox. Unfortunately, a lot of adults in the world today also lack it. But this is what Carl Jung says is the method of individuation. When we can hold the tension of opposites, it's an uncomfortable place. Most people want to say, I'll pick one or the other to get out of this discomfort. But then we're just doomed for the opposite to show itself again in another way and be uncomfortable again. If we can help our patient bear that discomfort and to stay there while this transformation happens within them, it requires consciousness to elevate to make sense of this paradox. That's how we psychologically develop, by being uncomfortable. The goal of the work is not to escape into spirit, but incarnation, to bring the gold of consciousness back into the world. Psychologically, this stage is the moment when a person no longer seeks perfection, but participation in the therapy sessions, in their relationships, and in the world. It's when they can hold the tension of opposites without collapse. And I will tell you that's a very, very hard thing to do. I work with my analyst for an hour and a half every Tuesday morning. And there are times where I think I can't hold that tension of opposites. There are also times when I'm in the rubedo and I'm like, I'm done. This is great. I got it all figured out. But what comes after the rubedo? Because this is a cycle, right? I start over. I find another negredo, or more accurately, another negredo finds me. But while we're in this stage, and while we've learned to hold that tension of opposites without collapse, the redness of life returns. The work of the soul is complete, for now, though we know the cycle will begin again. Most alchemists, medieval alchemists, said this great work, and another way to put it is the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. Not quite accurate in Harry Potter, but they're describing the process of individuation. And most alchemists say you have to do this process 4 times. If you look at most people's lives, we generally have at least 4 major life crises. The goal is not to get to a destination, right? It's to be okay in the process, that this is how life works, right? What's the opposite of suffering? What was that? I like peace. What else? Acceptance is great. Relief is great. Comfort. Oh, you guys are great. Oh, I like this school. This is good. Joy, ecstasy, love, right? We need these, right? We cannot have one side of a coin, right? If I want to take some SSRI that removes sadness from me, what are you going to see in your patients? I see it in patients all the time. They don't want to do the work. It's too hard. It's terrifying. I understand that. They want to fix. And their MD, after asking them 10 questions about their psychological profile, prescribes them an SSRI. So they don't feel sad anymore. And many of them don't. But many of them don't feel anything anymore. I know what joy is like because I know what despair is like. They're relative to another. These are the tension of the opposites I'm talking about. I cannot have one without the other. So these 4 stages are not linear steps. We look at this circle, right? And you'll hear this from patients. Oh, I'm right where I started. I've been before. And you get to, as a coach, from your different perspective, right? From their perspective, it's this circle, right? They're right back where they started. All the progress they thought they made is gone. We get to remind them, no. From your perspective, it's a circle. From my perspective, it's a spiral. There is movement forward in this linear pattern, while your experience feels cyclical, right? If I were to turn this even more, anybody know what change it would make? This is straight on. This is at an angle. But if that were straight from the side, it would be a wave, right? Like a sound wave, right? Like a marker of the tides coming in and going back out. Like your EKG of your heart beating. A wave is alive. A flat line is not so much. So these 4 stages are not linear steps, but a spiral. A rhythm of death and renewal that repeats throughout a lifetime. Each descent into darkness, the Negredo, prepares the next revelation of light. In alchemy, as in life, the work is never finished. It continues, refining, purifying, uniting, until the soul itself shines with the radiance of the divine. All cool, right? All really mythopoetic language, right? Sound like a poet, right? Not a psychologist, right? I'll tell you this, right? What is the language or ego? It's easy. It's words. It's sentences, right? It's paragraphs. When you're thinking, it's words. It's verbal. If you're ruminating at 3 in the morning in bed because your taxes are late and all these things, right? It's paragraphs and chapters and volumes. But it's verbal. But the language of the unconscious is not verbal. It's symbolic. Right? When we dream, we're not reading a text. We're not hearing a text read to us. We're seeing this symbolic interaction. This is literal. This is not. You might even call this irrational, but irrational doesn't mean wrong. And I've been more informed by somebody's unconscious psyche in the form of symbol than I ever have been in the words they tell me. I'll give you an example. Alchemy is not only metaphor. It's a living process that unfolds in psyche, often through symbol that appears in ordinary life. In therapy, these symbols arise naturally, without us as clinicians seeking them out. Trust me, they're going to show up in every session if you have eyes to see them. They are the soul's own language, where the ego uses words, psyche uses image. So one of my patients, this was 2 weeks ago, I just threw this in. It's relevant. It's a good story. Good case study. One of my patients, I'll call her Abby, right? She came into a session one day feeling utterly depleted. I thought she was going to fall asleep on my couch. Aside in the fact of her visibly shaking, exhaustion, She said, I'm exhausted for bullying everyone else together. My husband, my children, my friends, my parents, my coworkers, my patients. Everyone needs me. As she spoke, she got distracted, so she thought, and started describing her kitchen counter. To her, just describing even the chaos in her house. She laughed and said, you should see my kitchen counter. It's covered in mugs. I collect them. I have so many that they don't fit in the cupboards anymore. And she really does have a huge mug collection. When she travels around, she buys a mug, with Egypt on it. She's so known for this that the people in her lives, her husband, her children, her friends, her parents, coworkers, even patients, when they travel, they bring her back these mugs. She went on to describe how she was apologizing to her husband for all the clutter. They're everywhere, she said, but I can't seem to get rid of them. I paused and simply asked, what do you think those mugs are holding? She fell silent, and then she began to cry. The mugs were vessels, alchemical vessels, containers for others. Each one represented someone she held space for, someone she felt responsible to fill. She had become the kitchen counter, cluttered, burdened, overwhelmed by the endless task of holding. That was her nigredo, the blackening, the recognition of chaos. But from that awareness, something new came to her. She began to imagine herself reducing the number of mugs, or rotating through her collection, or this is my favorite, filling each one less. In that visualization that came from her, not from me, I simply asked, what do you think those mugs are holding? In that visualization, she shifted into the albedo, purification, a gentle rebalancing. Over time, she started setting boundaries, not as an intellectual act, but as a ritual of self-care. The simple act of noticing that symbol, these mugs, changed her relationship to her world. This is what I mean when I say Psyche speaks in images. If I had missed that or taken that literal, right, I would have missed it. We would have moved on to, well, let's try this, or let's try this. It's as good as, let's try this med, or let's try this med. I'm not listening to the patient, to the one that suffers, right? I don't know what your poisonous snake here is in Egypt. Is it an asp or viper? What's the poisonous snake of Egypt? Yeah, sand viper. Where I live, it's a rattlesnake, right? And so if you get bit by a rattlesnake while hiking in the mountains above my house, you got to go to the hospital pretty rapidly, right? But they're going to give you anti-venom, right? Does anybody know how we make anti-venom? Yeah. We inject horses with rattlesnake venom, then extract the antibodies, right? So in this case, the poison is the cure, right? Her suffering led us to what she needed as a fix. Her suffering brought forth this image. I don't know how I got on this topic of talking about mugs. I was talking about my life and these important things. But the Psyche found an image and injected it in the conversation. That held all the answers. I didn't do that. All I did was notice, right? And I didn't say, this is the fix, and I just said, what do you think about this? What's in those mugs? She told me. Physician, heal thyself, right? So we don't invent these images, these symbols. They arise from the depths, and we attend to them, right? We tend to them. We give them our attention. That's it. They will lead us to the transformation needed. Sometimes the image is small. A dreer, a recurring phrase, an object in the room, a mug. Sometimes it's enormous, a crisis, a loss, sometimes even falling in love. But in every case, the alchemical pattern is the same. Something breaks down, something is purified, something dawns, and something is integrated. Therapy then is not about fixing the symptom, right? The symptom, right? In depth psychology, we say the symptom is mercurial, right? Meaning based off the Greek god Mercury. Mercury was the only god that could go down to Hades and return. That was the power of Hades. Even Zeus, if he went into the underworld and touched the ground in Hades, could not ever leave. Hermes was the only god that could, because he had winged feet, so his feet would never touch the ground. Therefore, he became the messenger between Hades and Zeus, between the unconscious, right, the underworld, and the conscious self. So theory is not about fixing that symptom. It's about listening for a symbol. The symptom belongs to ego, but the symbol belongs to the soul. And when the symbol speaks, our task is not to analyze it to death. I'll say it again. When that symbol shows up, our task is not to analyze it to death. One of my professors, James Hillman, brilliant depth psychologist and theorist, his analyst was Carl Jung. He studied under Jung for a long time and eventually broke off and founded archetypal psychology. Hillman's great to read too. He will probably upset a lot of you. I didn't like him when I first started reading him. I definitely didn't like him as a professor. And it was just because I didn't understand his work enough. And a lot of people said he was arrogant. He said in a lecture once, "I don't have time to bring you up to speed. Come ready or talk to somebody else." That being said, he does fascinating work. He talks about if we interpret a symbol, right? If I interpret a symbol, he says, you've murdered it, right? A symbol is a semi-autonomous, almost living thing. It's dynamic. The next time she revisits mugs after doing this thing, these mugs are the symbol of the mug is gonna tell her something else. The symbol has changed her. A new her is now viewing the same symbol, right? It's gonna be a different interpretation. It's hermeneutic, right? It's like, does anybody do a little research in there right now? Right? Who's doing research? Okay, nice. Hermeneutic is a methodology, right? It goes in with the first time I read a text, I go in with a notion of what I think that text is about, but I don't have any idea. Maybe what I've heard from other people or read in the forward, or maybe even looked at the cover, but I have a notion of what that's about. But when I read it, this text transforms me, right? I'm now different having read this text, right? So I set the text down, come back to it 6 months later, or a year, or 10, 20 years. It's definitely a new me reading this text. This text is going to respond and talk to me in a different way than it was the first time, thereby being a new text. This new version of this new text is going to change me again. It's this back and forth. That hermeneutic approach is how we want to approach dialoguing with symbols, not interpreting them, right? They're alive, right? If I dream of a big black dog, what does that mean? James Hill would say, it doesn't mean anything, maybe with an expletive in there, right? It's just a big black dog. What does it tell you about yourself, right? I don't say, Dr. Amir means this. She's like, every time I interact with her, I get a new version of her and it transforms me in a new version of me, right? I can go back to Carl Jung and this quote: the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Now we're talking about chemists. Alchemists weren't pro-chemists, but chemists can offer us something, right? Look, if these two chemicals come together and there's a reaction, right? If we bring water and hydrogen together, right? Creates water. It doesn't turn the hydrogen into water. It doesn't turn the oxygen into water, right? Both are transformed into water. This is us and our patients. If there's any meaningful reaction with your patients, you're going to leave transformed. And the next time they see you, there's a different analyst and there's a different patient. It should be the same way with the symbols they bring you. Does that make sense? Make sense? And it's a lot less boring than cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm just telling you. So let's talk about that for a minute, right? Our job in the clinical therapeutic setting. The alchemist said that transformation cannot occur unless the vessel can withstand the fire. Right? Think about that. The alchemists were taking these substances and putting them through rigorous exchanges, right? Heating them to high temperatures, cooling them down drastically, drying them out, moistening them, all to see how they react and change, right? In therapy, we are the vessel, right? As clinicians, we are the vessel. The work asks us not to fix, but to hold the patient. In that first stage, what is happening to the patient? What is the degrader? It's the putrefaction. It's the breaking down. It's the falling apart. I will tell you a mistake I made when I was a young therapist, and I hope and I pray, inshallah, it doesn't happen to you, but I'm telling you it probably will, because it's counterintuitive. You will be sitting with a patient who is suffering, who is absolutely suffering, right? And you'll want to take that away from them. Your empathy, your natural empathy will want to take that away from them. Resist it. Allow them to suffer. Don't let them suffer, allow them to suffer. The minute you try to fix, you've contaminated the vessel. You've contaminated the work. I remind that of myself often. The patient is not broken. The patient is not broken. Our task is not to repair, it's reverence, to witness the process. The therapy room becomes a crucible. We are witnesses, mirrors, and containers. And in that holding, we ourselves are transformed. The therapy room becomes a crucible. Two souls, two vessels, participating in the same sacred experience. The Holy Quran says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. Light upon light, nur ala nur. That light, I think, is what we glimpse in the moments of healing, when two psyches meet and something unseen begins to shine. And with that, we return to the work again and again, purified, illuminated, and made more human.